My name is Patricia Anderson. I'm 61 years old, a school administrator from Phoenix, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had done everything right. I married young. Robert was my college sweetheart. We were both from working-class families. Both believed in hard work, saving early, and building a quiet life. We bought a modest house, raised no children, and poured our energy into our jobs. I worked in public education for over 3 decades. He worked in utilities. We didn't live lavishly. No boats, no brand new cars, just savings accounts, IRAs, and long conversations over coffee about what our retirement would look like. We talked about Europe. A river cruise down the Rhine. He wanted to see the vineyards in France. I wanted to read books on a balcony in Florence. We dreamed in postcards and budgeted in spreadsheets. After 38 years of marriage, I was finally getting close to the moment I had spent a lifetime building toward: retirement. My pension was secure. Our savings, I thought, were intact. The mortgage was nearly paid off. I'd even started collecting brochures for beachfront condos in Florida. I should have felt peace. But then there was the laptop. It wasn't anything suspicious, really. Robert had asked me to check our joint retirement account while he was away for a weekend trip, some conference in Albuquerque. The account had always been our shared dashboard, our future in numbers. I logged in, expecting to see what I always saw. Instead, I found nothing. The balance read just under $12,000. I blinked, refreshed, checked the history. The full retirement account, over $400,000, was gone, transferred over the last 3 years in chunks, some to accounts I didn't recognize, others listed as tuition payments, one transfer labeled NM Property Fund. My heart dropped. I clicked through the browser history. There were emails, names I didn't know, and a Gmail account, Sharon.Livingston, open in another tab, still signed in. She had sent him photos. Birthday party pictures. Kids smiling with their arms wrapped around him. One message dated 2 weeks ago read, "Thanks for covering the last payment for Alex's college. He's so lucky to have a father like you." I remember staring at that screen for what felt like an hour. But it was probably 3 minutes. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just sat there, silent. Something inside me, solid and old and sharp, clicked into place. I had been married to this man for nearly 4 decades, and now I knew. I hadn't really known him at all. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 5 years. I didn't have the words to explain what kind of sick I was, but it didn't matter. My voice must have said enough, because the secretary at the district office just whispered, "Take all the time you need," and hung up. I sat in the kitchen with a yellow legal pad and a pen. I wrote 2 columns, facts I know and things I need to find out. Under facts I know, I wrote, $400 retirement fund is nearly empty. Sharon Livingston equals mistress, Alex equals son, college age, New Mexico property account exists. Under things I need to find out, when it started, how much he spent, if there are other children, what I'm legally entitled to. I wasn't thinking about rage or revenge. Not yet. I was thinking about control. Because something I had built for 38 years had been dismantled behind my back. And if I couldn't salvage the past, I could damn well take ownership of what came next. Robert came home that evening like everything was normal. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, and made a joke about traffic. I just looked at him and said, "We need to talk." I showed him the printouts, account summaries, screenshots of emails, pictures of him with Sharon and her kids. His face went pale. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Finally, after a long silence, he said, "It's complicated." I said, "No, it's betrayal. That's not complicated at all." He started stammering about responsibility, about how Sharon had been alone with 2 kids and he had to help, how he never stopped loving me, how he meant to fix things. I let him ramble. I didn't argue. I just listened. Then I stood up and said, "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." That was it. No yelling, no throwing things, no asking why, because the answer didn't matter. Not anymore. What mattered was this. I was 61 years old, on the edge of retirement, and the man I had trusted most had stolen the future we promised each other and given it to strangers. So I was done waiting for explanations. It was time to build something for myself. I met with a divorce attorney the very next day. Her name was Marlene, mid-50s, sharp eyes, no nonsense. The kind of woman who had probably walked other wives through the same storm and knew exactly when to be blunt and when to be gentle. I laid everything out, Timelines, transactions, names, screenshots. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "He's going to fight this." "I'm not," I replied. We filed immediately. Under Arizona law, community property includes most assets acquired during the marriage. But once you can prove misuse or concealment, the courts tend to favor the one who got screwed. And I had plenty of evidence. Robert had used marital funds to buy a home in New Mexico, paid tuition for 2 children I never met, and drained our retirement without a word. Marlene told me the judges wouldn't take that lightly. Still, there was no guarantee I'd see any of that money back. Most of it was long gone. Even if the court ordered repayment, it would take years, and Robert was clever in how he moved funds. I'd get something, eventually, but it wouldn't be enough to retire on. I went home that night and cried. Not because I missed him, but because I realized I was starting over at 61. No plan, no cushion, no partner. Just me in a house that felt haunted by everything I no longer believed in. But life is strange, and sometimes it offers you exactly what you need when you least expect it. It happened 2 weeks later when I was digging through a fireproof lockbox in the back of my closet, looking for old property tax records and our marriage certificate. I found it under a stack of papers, folded inside a thin manila envelope. A life insurance policy dated July 1993. Robert's name as the insured. My name, clear as day, typed in black ink as the sole beneficiary. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another policy we'd probably canceled or replaced years ago. But something about the signature caught my eye, my maiden name. This was before we refinanced, before he started hiding things, before the betrayal. I called the number listed in the footer. The company still existed. The policy still existed. And then the voice on the phone said something that made me sit down. "Mrs. Anderson, this policy has a retirement rider attached. It's been compounding interest for nearly 30 years. Current cash value is, let me double check. Yes, 1.2 million. I went completely still. I asked again, just to be sure. And yes, because I was listed as the sole beneficiary and because the policy had never been altered, I had full rights to the accumulated value. Robert had forgotten it even existed, and now it was mine. Every last dollar. The irony didn't escape me. He spent years building a second life, secretly draining what we had, while the one account he couldn't touch had been quietly growing under my name all along. He thought he'd taken everything, but he forgot what I was always best at: paying attention. I hung up the phone and just stared at the wall. $1,200,000 in my name. Untouched, untouched by his lies, untouched by his second life, untouched by all the years I spent wondering if I'd ever get to breathe easy again. I didn't feel triumphant, not right away. What I felt was stillness, like the house had finally gone quiet after months of slamming doors and footsteps I couldn't trust. The next morning, I met with Marlene again. When I told her about the policy, she blinked twice and then broke into a grin. "Well," she said, "that's poetic justice if I've ever seen it." We verified the policy, filed the claim, and within 6 weeks, the money was deposited into a new account in my name only. I didn't tell Robert. I didn't need to. Let him believe I was walking away with nothing. Let him think the woman he discarded was limping off into a modest apartment and a frugal future. I wasn't. Not anymore. First thing I did, I sold the house. It wasn't out of spite. I just didn't want to wake up every morning to a kitchen where he kissed me goodbye before driving to another life. I didn't want to scrub the floorboards of that living room or sit on that front porch pretending it hadn't all been a lie. So I listed it, took a cash offer, packed only what I wanted, gave away the rest. And then I booked a flight. Florida, Gulf Coast. I'd clipped pictures of it in my planner for years. We'd always said, maybe someday. He said he preferred dry heat. I said I'd learn to compromise. But now compromise had officially retired. I bought a modest beachfront condo, nothing flashy but mine. A place where the air smelled like salt and possibility. I signed the deed and stood barefoot in the living room, looking out at the ocean. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had permission to exhale, and I didn't stop there. I remembered every woman I'd met in my years at the school. Single mothers working 2 jobs, showing up to parent-teacher conferences in scrubs and fast food uniforms, asking if there was any way they could finish their GEDs or go back to school. Women who looked tired but never stopped trying. So I started a scholarship fund, quietly. No press, no plaques, just a small foundation under my name, offering grants to women over 30 going back to school after raising kids or leaving abusive relationships. I didn't need credit. I just wanted to give someone else a different page to turn to. And then I booked a river cruise through Europe, the very one we used to daydream about. I added first-class airfare, solo, except I wasn't alone. I had me, the version of me who survived it all, built from scratch and still found a way to float. The cruise departed from Amsterdam on a crisp April morning. The air smelled like fresh bread and canal water, and the sky was the kind of gray that made everything feel cinematic. I stood on the deck with a cappuccino in hand, watching the shoreline drift slowly past. I wasn't checking emails, I wasn't texting updates. No one was expecting anything from me. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, I had no one else's plans to manage but my own. I met other travelers, retirees, newlyweds, a group of women from Vancouver celebrating their 60th birthdays together. One of them, Judith, leaned over to me at dinner and said, "You travel alone, sweetheart?" I smiled. Not alone, just untethered. We clinked glasses. Over the next 10 days, we drifted past windmills, castles, vineyards, and sleepy towns that didn't care who I used to be. I walked cobblestone streets, toured cathedrals, ate too much chocolate, and stayed up late, reading by the window of my stateroom. It felt like living inside the life I'd once only allowed myself to imagine. On day 8, in a town in Germany I couldn't pronounce, I sat down at a cafe and pulled out a postcard I'd picked up in Strasbourg. It had a watercolor painting of a river, a couple holding hands by the shore. I stared at it for a while. Then I took out my pen. "Hi, Robert. Europe is just as beautiful as we imagined. The river cruise is peaceful, the wine is good, and no one snores beside me at night. You always said we'd do this together. Turns out I do it just fine without you." Patricia, no return address. Just his name and the old house address, the one I'd sold months ago. I didn't know if he'd get it, but something about writing it felt complete. Not bitter, not cruel, just done. Later that night, back on the ship, Judith asked if I was going to travel more now. "Maybe," I said, "but not to run away from anything." She tilted her glass toward me. "To run toward it instead?" "Yes," I said, "exactly that." And I meant it. Because what Robert stole from me wasn't just money or trust, it was years of believing my life had to be small to be secure. That the safest thing I could do was stay, forgive, adjust, endure. But now I knew something better. That the safest thing I could do was walk away and build something bigger. On my terms. When I got back to Florida, the postcard had already arrived. A neighbor texted me a photo. "You've got mail," she joked, not knowing the irony of it all. I laughed to myself as I stared at the picture. I didn't know if Robert had seen it yet, or if he'd moved again. I didn't care. It wasn't about whether he read it. It was about the fact that I sent it. Closure, I'd learned, isn't something you ask for. It's something you choose. 2 months later, I was walking along the shoreline near my condo, sun on my face, toes in the surf, when I saw a man sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. I almost passed by, but something about the slope of his shoulders stopped me. It wasn't Robert. Of course not. But it could have been. Tired, lost, drowning quietly while the world kept moving. That night, I donated another $10,000 to the scholarship fund, added a clause for emergency childcare support. I'd spent so much of my life making things work for other people, smoothing over everyone else's storms. But this time, I got to decide where my energy went. Who got my time? Who earned a seat at my table? Robert didn't call. Not when the house sold. Not when the divorce finalized. Not when the article ran in the school district's retirement newsletter, featuring my move to Florida and the scholarship fund in my name. But I did hear about him, through a mutual friend who ran into him at the grocery store. She said he looked tired. Still working. Still commuting. Still getting by. "He asked about you," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell him?" I said you seemed free. That made me smile, because that's exactly what I was. Not rich, not flashy, but free in a way that money can't buy and betrayal can't erase. The kind of freedom that comes from surviving heartbreak and finding your own rhythm on the other side of it. The kind of freedom that comes from not needing anyone's permission to live well. Especially not his. 2 years after the divorce, I marked the anniversary in my own quiet way. No candles, no ceremony, just a walk on the beach at sunrise, coffee in hand, and a playlist I'd built for myself. Songs I loved but never played when Robert was around because he didn't like anything slow. The tide was low. The sky was pink and silver. I stood ankle deep in the water, breathing in the morning, and I thought, this is what peace feels like. Not absence, not silence, just stillness without fear. That evening, I sat on my balcony overlooking the Gulf and watched the sky burn into gold. I pulled out a small stack of thank you letters, notes from women who had received my scholarship. Most of them were single moms. A few were survivors. Some were just women who'd been told they were too old to start over. One letter stood out. It was written in slanted cursive on lined notebook paper. Dear Miss Anderson, I don't know your full story, but whatever it is, thank you for turning it into something that reached me. Because of your help, I'll be the first in my family to earn a degree. I hope one day I get to help someone the way you helped me. I read it twice, then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like all the parts of my life that had been broken and scattered had slowly, quietly rearranged themselves into something beautiful. I thought about Robert. Wherever he was, I hoped he found what he thought he needed. But I didn't wish to go back. I didn't long for closure. Because here's the truth I finally understood. Some people break you, and some betrayals feel like they end everything. But sometimes they just make room for the life you were meant to have, the life you never thought you were allowed to want. I wasn't just retired, I wasn't just free, I was finally deeply whole. And that, more than any postcard or payout, was the real inheritance. And that's how I learned that sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. Just patience, and your name on the right paperwork. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Like, subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more true tales of betrayal, karma, and freedom. And send this to someone who needs to read the fine print.